In this video, I'm going to talk about the Mona Tinsley case, one of the most famous and emblematic cases in all of England, and which was even responsible for changing a law that was in force for almost 300 years. On January 5, 1937, Mona Lillian Tinsley, a 10-year-old girl, disappeared after leaving her school in Newark-on-Trent, a small town located in east of England. Mona was one of the 7 children of the couple Wilfred and Lillian Tinsley, and was described as a bright, intelligent child who got along very well with other students at school. She disappeared later that day after leaving her school, Guildhall Street Methodist, which was approximately a 20-minute walk from her home. The girl was supposed to arrive around 3:50 p.m., but she didn't. When they realized that she hadn't arrived, her parents weren't too worried, as they had relatives in the area and thought that she might have visited one of them on her way home. However, the hours passed, and as the girl had not yet returned home, her parents began to look for her at homes of relatives and friends. All the relatives and friends of Mona's parents said they hadn't seen her, so at 9 p.m., they decided to contact the police, and the search was immediately launched, with the promise that it would be intensified by dawn. The search continued throughout the night, and the next morning, the police contacted all the schools in the area informing them of the disappearance. They also asked all staff and students who had any kind of information, however remote, to report it to them. The police searched several canals and rivers in the area. They also knocked on the doors of local residents and searched empty and abandoned properties. In addition to the police, hundreds of volunteers helped with the search. To help find the girl, making the news reach everyone in the region, several newspapers at the time stamped their front pages with stories about the disappearance. With that, the news quickly spread throughout the region and later throughout the country. On January 6, 2 witnesses came forward to the police, saying they had seen the girl with a middle-aged man at a bus station. One of the witnesses was able to identify this man as a former tenant of the girl's family. In the meantime, other witnesses appeared. A neighbor of Mona's family said the man's behavior with the girl was strange. Another neighbor told the police that she saw the girl with the man wandering around a corner near the girl's school the very day she disappeared. Later, the police spoke with a bus driver named Charles Reville. Charles said that on the day Mona disappeared, a girl with the same characteristics as her boarded his bus around 4:45 p.m. According to him, the girl was in company of a middle-aged man and landed with him in a neighboring town called Redford. The driver added that the man had bought a one-way ticket and a return ticket for himself, but for the girl, he had only bought a one-way ticket. This important testimony from the driver was confirmed by a passenger named Stanley Batts, who was also on the bus that day. Stanley told the police that he saw a girl with the same features as Mona in the company of a middle-aged man traveling between the cities of Newark and Redford. Based on these testimonies, the police decided to talk to Wilfred and Lillian, the girl's parents, about this middle-aged man who, according to information from witnesses, was a former tenant of theirs. The two said this man's name was Frederick Hudson, and that they had met him through a woman named Edith Grimes, who is Lillian's sister and Mona's aunt. They also said that before Frederick was their tenant, he was Edith's tenant for a long time. The man reportedly started staying at their home in October 1935. However, 3 weeks later, they asked him to leave as he was not paying the rent. Despite this, Wilfred and Lillian emphasized that the man's departure was amicable, and also stated that in the short time Frederick stayed at their house, he had gotten along very well with their 7 children, who even called him Uncle Fred. When asked if they thought the man would have a reason to do something to Mona, they said no. Just for you to better understand the case, Wilfred and Lillian had a guest room that was inside their house, and they used to rent this room to people who were interested. I don't know nowadays, but I know that years ago, this practice was very common in families looking for an alternative income. After talking to Mona's parents, the police went after Edith Grimes, Lillian's sister, who lived in the city of Sheffield. Edith told the police officers that Frederick Hudson's real name was actually Frederick Nodder, and that he adopted the Hudson surname as a pseudonym. She said he was 49 years old, addicted to drink, violent, and had poor personal hygiene and few friends. She also said that Frederick used to work as a car mechanic and truck driver in the town of Redford. Furthermore, she said that he had abandoned his wife many years before, staying with her and later with her sister and brother-in-law. Finally, the police asked her where they could find Frederick, to which she replied that she didn't know, as it had been a long time since she had seen him. This assertion by Edith of not having seen the man for a long time was later contradicted by the neighbors of hers. According to this neighbor, he saw a truck whose driver's description matched Frederick stopped in front of Edith's house a few days after Christmas 1936. With this new information, the police spoke to Edith again, but the woman wasn't very cooperative. Her husband, however, admitted that Frederick had called their home shortly after Christmas, but denied any knowledge of his whereabouts. After a brief investigation, gathering information in pubs and lorry depots, the officers arrived at a haulage company in Redford where Frederick was employed. With the help of his company, the police got the address of Frederick, who was living in a village called Hayton in the city of Nottinghamshire. Later that day, police went to the suspect's home, but he was not there. Later, at 11 p.m., he was spotted on a road and intercepted by the police. With Frederick in hand, the officer showed a photo of Mona, asking if he knew her and if he knew anything about her disappearance. Frederick said he knew the girl, but hadn't seen her in over a year, ever since he was evicted from her parents' home, and he didn't know anything about her disappearance. Asked where he was on January 5th, Frederick confirmed that he had indeed been to Newark, but stated that he was just looking for work. He is said to have returned to Redford alone on the 3:45 p.m. bus, approximately 10 minutes before Mona disappeared. As the days went by, while some policemen questioned Frederick, other policemen began speaking to his neighbors. One of these neighbors claimed to the police that he had seen a girl matching Mona's description at Frederick's house on January 5th. A maid who worked at the house next door to the suspect also told officers that she had seen a girl on his property. According to her, she saw a girl aged between 8 and 9, wearing a blue sweater, standing at the back door of Frederick's house. She said that while the girl was standing around, Frederick was working in the back garden. All this combination of testimonies from several witnesses caused the police to arrest Frederick. In addition, all houses, drains, ditches, and pits within a 3-mile radius of the man's property were searched. While searches outside the suspect's property turned up nothing, at his home, officers did find a handkerchief that was later confirmed to have belonged to Mona. The scarf was near a water tank at the rear of the suspect's home. Pieces of paper with drawings and writings made by a child was also discovered inside the house. In addition, an open package of candy, 2 dirty tissues, and a can of Vaseline were found under a pillow in a bedroom in the house. Subsequently, Frederick was taken for reconnaissance, and each of the witnesses who saw Mona on January 5th and 6th ended up recognizing the man as the same man they saw in the girl's company. When confronted with these identifications and the evidence that was discovered in his house, Frederick changed his initial version of what he would have done on January 5th. According to him, he met Mona by chance outside her school, and that upon recognizing him, she happily called out to him saying, "Hello, Uncle Fred." He said that after that, the girl asked him to take her to the house of Edith Grimes, her aunt, because she wanted to see the newborn cousin she hadn't seen yet. He said he was a little reluctant, but the girl insisted and he ended up giving up to her request. According to him, Mona spent the night at his house, and the next day, he gave her money and put her on a bus to the city of Sheffield, which was where Edith lived. Frederick also stated that Edith Grimes is the one who could help the police in their investigation, and said that she always knew his address, but that for some reason she was hiding this information. Frederick ended his statement by saying that after sending Mona to her aunt's house, he went to 2 bars before returning home. Police confirmed through witnesses that in fact, Frederick had been to the 2 bars he mentioned. However, to them, everything else in the story seemed untrue. With Frederick in custody, the police decided to gather information about him to better profile him. As described by Edith Grimes, Frederick had difficulty holding down a job because of his habits, which included heavy drinking. According to close people, Frederick was a totally repulsive person. He was separated from his wife and had an outstanding warrant for his arrest for assault. In addition, he began a reputation of dishonesty and drunkenness, which made him rarely able to build lasting relationships. As a teenager, Frederick didn't like to take a shower, and had very questionable lifestyle habits, and because of this, he was even expelled from several accommodations. Due to having an active arrest warrant, Frederick Nodder decided to adopt the pseudonym Frederick Hudson so that he would be more difficult to find. After being evicted by Mona's parents, he spent the next year in the town of Redford, and in June 1936 moved into a small house in the village of Hayton. According to neighbors, people in the neighborhood used to avoid the man. Despite the extensive searches that were carried out, no trace of Mona was found, but even so, due to what the police had already collected, Frederick was accused of having taken the girl by force. The man said he was innocent and that the girl stayed with him at his house of her own free will. After some more investigations, the police became convinced that Mona was no longer alive. However, Frederick refused to admit the crime and tell the whereabouts of the body. With that, the police decided to expand the radius of search of the region to see if they could find the girl. As with previous searches, this search was also attended by hundreds of volunteers and several sniffer dogs. While the searches were taking place, both local and national media devoted extensive coverage to the case, publishing photos and physical description of Mona, as well as asking the public for help. After 3 weeks and with no trace of the girl, New York's chief police decided to seek help from Scotland Yard, England's main police. On January 25th, Scotland Yard Chief Inspector Leonard Burt and a detective sergeant arrived at Hayton. The two organized an extensive search of all houses, drains, ditches, and lakes in the area. This search was considered one of the greatest in the history of the British police, despite not having given the expected result, which was to find the girl. Before the chief inspector and his colleague left the investigation, they informed local police officers that they believed that Mona's body had been dumped into the river Idle, and that it was likely washed out to the sea. Even after the departure of the Scotland Yard police, investigations continued by the local police. Later, a renowned psychic named Steele Roberts contacted the New York police chief, offering her help in locating the girl, on the condition that her involvement in the investigation was confidential at the time. She asked the police to send her some of the girl's clothes to have what she called a spiritual procedure. Mona's parents agreed and donated some of the girl's clothes. Holding a pink silk dress that Mona wore shortly before her disappearance, Estelle said she felt the girl was no longer alive. She said that the girl was taken to a house with a ditch filled with water, and that she had spent most of her time inside that house copying drawings from a book. This allegation coincided with the drawings found by the police in Frederick's home. The medium claimed that Mona was suffocated in an upstairs room in the facility. Then, according to her, the criminal put the body in a bag and transported it to a river beyond the field that existed behind the house. The woman then told the police that they would find the body there. However, after a search, nothing was found, but as it's a river, it simply could have been washed away. Between March 9 and March 10, 1937, Frederick's trial took place. He was accused of having taken the girl by force and of having deprived her of her freedom. However, although there is a strong physical and circumstantial evidence attesting to his guilt, the fact that no body was found meant that he could not be tried for taking the girl's life, since at the time, it was worth understanding that without a body, no crime. This legal understanding existed due to a fact that occurred in England in 1660. At the time, a man named William Harrison disappeared without a trace. During investigations, 2 men and a woman were arrested accused of taking William's life and disappearing with his body. That's because, days before, witnesses saw these 2 men and this woman talking to William, and that was the closest the authorities at the time got solving the case. Due to the serious accusation, the 2 men and the woman were sentenced to capital punishment, which was carried out on them less than a year. Only to everyone's surprise, 2 years later, in 1662, William Harrison reappeared saying that he had been taken across the country by bandits. This had an enormous impact on English criminal law, and the principle that without a body no crime endured for almost 300 years. After 13 days of trial, Frederick was sentenced to 7 years in prison for taking Mona Tinsley against her will. Throughout his trial, Frederick remained silent, leaving only his lawyer to speak. About this, the judge in charge of the case went so far as to declare that the defendant knew what had actually happened to the girl, but out of sheer malice, he preferred to remain silent, causing the anguish of the girl's family to increase. After sentencing, Frederick Nutter was taken to Lincoln Prison. Months went by, and both the family, the authorities, and even the people following the case had lost hope that Mona would be found. It was then that on June 6, 1937, 5 months after the disappearance, a family that was taking a boat trip on the Ida River saw something strange in the water, close to the bank. As they approached, they realized that it was the body that was too small to be that of an adult. This family quickly went to the authorities to inform them of the terrible find. Upon arriving at the scene, the police found that there was metal and other objects attached to the body with the intention of making it sink, but it didn't work out very well. Nearby, the police found a coat and a small boot. They also found a torn and a rotted bag, which appeared to have been used to transport the body, just as the medium had spoken months before. Despite the almost certainty that the body belonged to Mona Tinsley, the police didn't rush and preferred to wait for one of the girl's parents to make the identification, only then to issue an official statement. Initially, the body was transferred to a nearby inn, where Mona's father identified him through the clothes that were on it, which were the same ones that his daughter was wearing when she disappeared. According to the police, the body was 13 kilometers from Frederick's house, where Mona was last seen alive. Later, a necropsy determined that the cause of death was due to Mona being suffocated, and she was already lifeless when she was thrown in the river, just as the medium had also said. Due to the advanced state of decomposition of the body, it was not possible to determine whether there was forced intercourse or not, and as it was in the 30s, there was still no DNA technology that could have determined this. The news of the body's finding reverberated throughout the country. Many already felt that she was no longer alive, while others had still little hope that she was well somewhere. Her funeral took place on June 10, 1937 in a local church, where the girl attended Sunday school. Hundreds of people filled the streets as her coffin was carried out from the church to the Newark Cemetery, where her body was laid to rest. With the discovery of the body, the police could now finally get a much higher sentence for Frederick. On June 28, Frederick Nutter was formally charged with taking the life of Mona Lillian Tinsley. 5 months after the man was charged, he was put on trial again. The second trial began on November 22, 1937. The defendant's defense argued that he had no motive for committing the crime, and claiming that someone else could have done this to the girl while she was traveling alone to Sheffield. Unlike the first trial, on this day, Frederick decided to speak. He reaffirmed what he had told the police in his statement, that he had not seen the girl after putting her on a bus. He also said that he did not harm the girl and used the same hypothesis on his defense, that someone else may have committed the crime. Among the many witnesses for the prosecution who testified at the second trial was the bus driver Charles Review. According to Charles, he saw when Frederick boarded his bus in the presence of a girl with the same characteristics as Mona. Charles emphasized the fact that Frederick bought round-trip tickets for him, but for the girl, he only bought one-way tickets. Some experts also came to testify where they presented numerous pieces of evidence they had collected throughout the investigation. Ultimately, the second trial lasted 2 days, and the jury took 75 minutes to reach a verdict. On November 24, 1937, 10 months after the crime, Frederick Nutter was found guilty of the crime against Mona Tinsley and given capital punishment. After hearing his sentence, Frederick smiled and said he was leaving the courtroom with a clear conscience. He never confessed to the crime. A few days later, his defense filed an appeal in an attempt to reverse the sentence. This appeal was considered by 3 judges of the Court of Appeal on December 13 and was dismissed on the same day. At 8 a.m. on December 30, 1937, Frederick Nutter was sentenced to death by the state in Lincoln Prison. The case of Mona Tinsley was responsible for the abolition of the principle "no body, no crime", a principle that was incorporated into the laws of the country in 1662 due to the case of William Harrison, as I have already mentioned. Once that principle was abolished, a conviction for taking someone's life could be obtained based on the circumstantial evidence, if that evidence is convincing enough. What happened to Frederick Nutter has become a rarity in English legal history, as he was convicted on separate charges in 2 trials in different cities, and for the same crime. This was the case of Mona Lillian Tinsley, one of the most famous and emblematic cases in England that caused the laws of the country to be changed. Well guys, that's it for today. Thanks for watching until the end, best wishes, and I'll see you next time.